Hello, biologists. Welcome to class. To start, I want you to think about these 5 foods, and I want you to organize them in your head from lowest greenhouse gas emissions to grow and get ready to be consumed to highest greenhouse gas emissions. So pause the video, go ahead and do that. And here's the answer. The lowest greenhouse gas emission is going to be the plant products, the beans and the legumes, then the dairy products, then fish, chicken, and beef. This information came from an article. Here it is, Multiple Health and Environmental Impacts of Food. This article is from 2019. And what they did was they looked at 5 different health outcomes and 5 different aspects of environmental degradation. And they rated each of the foods that they looked at based on both of those things. I will link to this article for you on Blackboard to check out. It's really cool. But I want to go over the results because it links directly to what we've been talking about with climate change and loss of biodiversity. So here first, we have an overview of the food types and our health outcomes. The first health outcome is mortality, that is death rate. And then we have 4 aspects of morbidity, which is like illness. We have coronary heart disease, colorectal cancer, diabetes, and stroke. The foods that they looked at were whole grains all the way down to olive oil. I think that you'll recognize most of these, except maybe this acronym here. What do you think SSBs are? They're sugar-sweetened beverages. So think like a Coca-Cola or anything that comes in a can in a plastic bottle and has a ton of sugar in it. So if we look at the overall mortality rate, we have a 1 number here in the center with a black dotted line. If it's to the right of that, it's associated with a higher mortality rate. And if it's to the left of that, it's associated with a lower mortality rate. The dot in the center is the average. And then we have 5% and 95% error bars on either side. So that shows you like the scale of the data. It's really cool how big the error bars are, right? So whole grains, really tight error bars. There's not a lot of variation in that data, and it is to the left of the line, so it's associated with a lower mortality rate. Something like legumes, and over here in the diabetes one, a huge error bar, even though the average is very far to the left of the line. So it's still average, lower associated with diabetes, but the confidence level is variant, and that's really interesting. The different colors indicate what type of food it is. So plant products are green, fish is purple, we have gray for dairy, we got pink for chicken, we've got red for red meat, blue for sugar-sweetened beverages, and orange for olive oil. So take a moment, pause the video, check it out, find your general trends. And here we have the environmental impacts. We have acidification potential. We know about ocean acidification. We have eutrophication potential. Remember, that was runoff of fertilizers that caused those dead zones in the water because they allowed that algae boom and then the algae die off. We have greenhouse gas emissions. That was the first question I asked you. We have land use. How much? How degraded is the land? And then we have scarcity weighted water use. Scarcity weighted means if it's grown in an area that is drought prone or historically does not have a lot of water, that would have a higher impact on its water use than a water sucking organism that lived in an area with abundant water. So it's scarcity rated. Check out these averages and error bars. Here we're going to have one be like less associated. If it's to the left of one, it's a decrease, and if it's to the right of one, it's an increase. And please note that this time the scales are not consistent. So there's a difference in the scales on this graph. Take a moment, pause it. What kind of trends do you see? And then lastly, this article has another way to think about this data, and that's using radar plots. So I love a radar plot. They're not common enough, in my opinion. Here is how a radar plot works. So a radar plot in the center would be a low level. And on the outside would be a high level. I'm going to go ahead and get my pencil ready so that we can draw on this. If I had a health impact that was really high, I would put a dot out here on the high level, the outside. But if I had a high mortality rate and a low coronary artery disease, it would be a dot here. Let's say that it's the same for diabetes, colorectal, and then pretend I'm making this up, but just to show you how this works, that there's a high association of stroke with this food. And then if my food has a low greenhouse gas emission, let's just make it dramatic and put it real low, low land usage, low use eutrophication, low acidification, but like super high water scarcity rated use. I would end up with a radar plot that looks like this. So you connect these, and then you pop out to where it's high, and then you drop back into where it's low, and then you pop back out to where it's high and drop back in where it's low. And so these areas where it's sticking out, that's indicating high, and where it's back in the circle, that is low. And so you end up with these really odd, like cloud-shaped formations, which is why they're called radar plots, as they kind of looked like cloud formations to whoever named them. Let's check out the data from the article. Here we have the same radar plot. We have all the foods together, and then we have the foods listed individually. So we have our green ones that are plants and our red ones that are processed meat. Remember, if it's on the outer circle, that means that it was a high impact. So here, unprocessed red meat and processed red meat, all on the right side, which was our environmental impact, very far out. So there is a high environmental impact. And on the left side, where we're looking at health impacts, it's also quite far out. And that indicates that these are unhealthy and bad for the environment. In contrast, something like fruits and vegetables and whole grains, they're tighter in. They do spike outward for things like a little more stroke, a little more greenhouse gas emissions, a little more eutrophication for whole grains. But in general, since it's tight in, the impacts are less. Fish is interesting, really good associations for health, and then farther out on the right side, which is the association for green or environmental impacts. Same for chicken. The left side is tight in, so less effect for health. The right side is farther out, meaning bad impacts for environmental aspects. Isn't that really interesting? I love a good radar plot. So feel free to email me anytime about these. I think it's super cool. And please do check out that article. Now, I do want to ask you some follow-up questions because thinking about scientific design is really important in this class. So let's practice. What was the independent variable in this article? The independent variable is the thing that you change. That's going to be the types of foods. What was the dependent? What are you measuring? We're looking at both the environmental impact and the health impact. So the answer is going to be D, both A and B. What was the overall conclusion from this article? It's going to be that foods with a lower environmental impact are often the most healthy, and foods with a higher environmental impact are often the most unhealthy. So we can do a good thing for both the environment and our body by avoiding these high emission foods. I want you to take a moment and think about what do you already know that's being done in response to climate change. These are called climate change actions, and we're going to go through a couple that are being done in Oregon and what's being done nationally and what we can do as individuals. But please take a moment and reflect. What do you already know? One of the things that I always think about what's being done is carbon sinks. A carbon sink is anything that naturally absorbs carbon dioxide, for example, trees or the ocean or soil, and then carbon sources or anything that's releasing carbon dioxide, like burning green or fossil fuels, but also cellular respiration, right? I'm releasing carbon dioxide right now as I speak. When I'm thinking about what we can be doing, I love thinking about forests. So Oregon's forests are incredible. We have a ton of forested land, and in general, forests in the United States offset 10 to 15% of our annual carbon emissions. And that's fantastic. That's a good amount. Where does the carbon go in the forest? About 4% goes into leaves that are dropped and the sticks that are dropped. We call that leaf litter or floor litter. About 4% is stored in dead wood of trees and branches. So that's just there until it gets broken down and exhaled by our fungi and decomposers. About 7% is in the living roots of trees. 35% is in the trunk and the branches and the leaves of trees. And majority, 50%, is going to be in the soil. So protecting the soil, maintaining the soil, that's going to be hugely important for our forest for storing that carbon. In Oregon, we have a graph here showing us the percent of land that's available and the percent of carbon that is stored in that land. So it goes up to 50, and we have United States Forest Service. They have the majority of the forested land in our state, and that stores the majority of the carbon. We have other federal land, we have state local land, we have corporate land. A lot of this is timber companies that are using the land to produce timber products, which is a huge source of revenue for Oregon. And then we have non-corporate, which includes private land owners. Now, what does Oregon have in place to maintain our forests? Let me give you a brief history of Oregon's forest protection laws. In 1941, Oregon adopted the Oregon Forest Conservation Act, and it was designed to address reforestation and fire protection. Then in 1971, Oregon became the first state to implement a comprehensive set of laws that are governing forest practices. It was called Oregon Forest Practices Act, so the OFPA. Since 1971, the OFPA has more than 250 enforceable rules, and that applies to both state and private land, but there's separate rules for federal land. So private and state are under this guideline. And in this guideline, one of the things that is required is if you harvest timber, so if you're taking that 35% of the carbon that's stored in trees out, you are required to replant within 2 years of harvest, and you have to replant 100 to 200 trees per acre. And there's also requirements in maintaining their growth. So you have to make sure that you're actually growing the trees and not just planting them to get through the requirement for it. So this is awesome. This is pretty progressive. There's a lot of really interesting parts of this. If you're interested in regulations, please check it out. Absolutely fascinating. We have a major assessment that's done for our state. It's called the Oregon Climate Assessment. It's done by several different scientists that work together to do it. They just released last year, number 7. So in this assessment, they talk about the different types of forests that Oregon has, our potential to add more forest, the land that could be forested, and if we do that, how much carbon will be pulled out of the atmosphere, called carbon sequestration, in millions of metric tons. So we have 2 types of forestation. We have reforestation. Reforestation is when you replant forest on areas that used to have forest. And then we have afforestation. That's when you plant forest on areas that did not historically have forest. So maybe a grassland or a prairie type area. So you're adding forest where it did not exist before, as opposed to replacing forest. We have the type of coverage that would be used. We have the statewide extent of area in hectares. So HA is a hectare. A hectare is 10,000 meters squared. We have the percentage of space in the hectares written here. And then if we do those actions, if we afforest and reforest, the amount of carbon that will be sequestered by 2030 and by 2050. So this is progressive, this is forward-looking, and this is thinking about the impact that we could have. And it's really awesome. I will link to this full climate assessment for you on Blackboard. It's massive, so you do not have to read the whole thing, but I do think it's really interesting and I would want to peruse it if someone was telling me about it. So I'll make sure it's linked there for you. We also can use urban trees as carbon sinks. It doesn't just have to be forest. Here I have an infographic from Friends of Trees. Friends of Trees is an organization that plants trees in urban areas. Take a moment, pause the video, and read each of these facts. It's pretty impressive. We also have a program that is encouraging transportation to use cleaner fuels. It's called Oregon's Clean Fuel Program. And in this program, the program is set up to give credits if you meet the standards and to generate deficits if you do not meet the standards. And you can buy and trade these deficits and credits. It's quite complex, but what really matters to us is here we have the average carbon intensity, we have the years, we have gasoline and we have diesel in two different colors. And by 2026, we're already past a 10% reduction in our more polluting fuels. So we are changing the type of fuels that we're using. And if everything goes as intended, by 2035, we'll have a 37% reduction, which is a great step. What else is Oregon doing? Oregon has some greenhouse gas emission regulations, and this is really interesting because it's ongoing. So in 2022, Governor Brown signed Executive Order 2004, and it was an attempt to regulate greenhouse gas emissions after legislation failed to pass a policy when they had intended to pass a policy. So that went into effect because she signed it. And then next year, it was invalidated because the court said that the DEQ, the Department of, Emissions and Quality, I believe, DEQ, was failing to comply with public discourse requirements. So after it was invalidated, it sat for another year. Then it was rebranded in 2024 as the Climate Protection Program, the CPP, and it established new legally binding requirements, including a declining cap on greenhouse gases and regulations for fossil fuel suppliers and large industrial users. Overall, the goal of this program is to reduce by 50% in 2030 and by 90% in 2050. And those are massive reductions. So this is really exciting. But then, less than a month ago, we got a new slate of legal challenges for the CPP. I'll link to this article for you as well. It's from OPB, and it will go through what we are looking for in the future and what's going to be happening with this ambitious program. Oregon's DEQ has several other laws and regulations in place to protect the environment and to address climate change. So I have the link for you here. It's worth your time to go to our government website, click through these different actions at the top, and see what's going on in Oregon in relation to water quality or land usage or recycling, just so you get the full view of these climate actions that are being taken. Now let's talk about what's going on nationally. So the United States Department of Agriculture has a website called the Northwest Climate Hub. It's for our area, the Pacific Northwest, and they have figured out adaptation frameworks. And the framework is like an action plan of things that can be done in response to a problem. They have two action frameworks. One is RAD and one is RRT. And these are being used federally to help mitigate the problems that are going on with climate change. RAD stands for Resist, Accept, Direct. And RRT is Resistance, Resilience, Transition. What do those things mean? What do they actually do? Let's check it out. So the main difference between RAD and RRT is that RRT includes resilience. We know ecologically that resilience means your ability to withstand disturbance, and we can measure disturbance. We talked about that when we talk about ecosystems. How are these categories different? Let's see. What are some actions that fit into each of these categories? Resist or resistance is going to be trying to make fuel breaks so that we don't have such intense fires, remove invasive species, create ways to handle insect infestations that are not detrimental to other insects like pesticides. We're going to avoid those and try and use pheromones or other novel attempts. So that's like setting yourself up to withstand disturbance, except is allowing what's happened to happen. You know, allow a change to occur naturally. When a fire burns, allow it to burn until it like comes up to your property level. So stop it until it gets to threatening infrastructure, but letting nature take its course. Resilience is going to be actively trying to make your habitat more able to withstand disturbance. So that's going to be thinning, doing prescribed burns, making culverts, trying to prevent things before they happen. And then direct or transition, that's going to be assisted migration, try and get your forest set up to be more adaptable, try and connect landscapes together to allow more migratory species through. So that's trying to guide it into the future, direct transition. That might sound really vague, but there is a full list of actions in a large document that I'm going to link to in a little bit for you to see. We'll talk about it in just like 2 slides. Before we do that, I want to show you a video. I'm going to link to it on Blackboard. And this video is from OPB's series Super Abundant. It's specifically talking about how agriculture is responding to climate change. And this is going to be one of those actions in RAD or RRT. So here's a actionable example of what's going on. In response to those frameworks, the USDA made a large document called Climate Risk Management Practices. These practices are organized by resource area. So there's water and infrastructure, forest vegetation, non-forest vegetation, fisheries and fish habitats, wetlands and riparian areas, wildlife, and recreation. And in each of these resource areas, they go through, they talk about the climate change sensitivities, they describe what is susceptible to harm, and then they give general practices that can be done and specific practices under those general practices. And these are going to be big ideas, but also really practical. And I think it's important to link to this because these actions are like next steps. They're next things that we can take as Americans, as Oregonians, to help mitigate what's going on with climate change. And so I have a challenge for you. I'm going to link to this large document and I'm going to have you scan it. And I want you to pick 2 of the practices from whatever resource you find most interesting that you think would be the most beneficial in being an action in response to climate change. And my challenge for you is after you do that, talk to someone in your life about it. We know from that TED Talk we watched previously that the best thing we can do for climate change is to be talking about it, is to be addressing it, and to be sharing what we've been learning with our friends and family. And so I'm challenging you to find 2 practices and tell your friends about them. And I think that it might spark a really interesting conversation because climate change is something that we're all experiencing. We often think about, but we don't often talk about. We've seen that data before. And so, will you do it? Let's see. Let me know. Email me. The last thing I have for you is I find that when I think about climate change, sometimes I get a little bummed out, but then I remember I have the ability to make a difference. And one of my colleagues always says, the action is the antidote to despair. I want you to check them out and see if they have any volunteer opportunities or information for you. These are places where you could find a way to get involved, and a way to get involved that might make you feel more empowered as an individual that is experiencing this big issue, the big issue of climate change. So I hope that you find something cool. And this is not a requirement. You don't have to go volunteer, but I want you to have resources if you are interested in that. And maybe I will see you at one of the volunteer events. I volunteer with Friends of Trees every winter to plant trees in my neighborhood. So if you get an opportunity to volunteer with them, it's always a great time. And maybe I'll see you there. Have a great day. Email me and we'll talk soon. Bye.